This is a really great opportunity we have today to hear from a world-class architecture firm and some members of that group. We're engaged in conversation with the Ball State about doing some joint research and applied design activities. Our lead speaker today is Brian Vitale. He's an award-winning design director and managing principal of the Chicago office of Gensler. He leads 350 or more designers and thinkers who are producing a wide range of acclaimed work and research, evidence-based design, basically. He's been widely exhibited and published and has been the recipient of numerous awards, including the 2014 National AIA Young Architects Award, as well as both the AIA Illinois John Welborn Root Award and the AIA Chicago Young Architect Award. He's a firm believer in the benefits of blurring the line between academia and the professional world. He has served as an adjunct professor of design at the University of Illinois at Chicago's School of Architecture and as a visiting faculty member at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where in 2015 he delivered their convocation speech. He was born and raised in Chicago. He's always striving to find the poetic in the everyday. His passion for design can be seen in award-winning projects like the Gratz Center at Fourth Presbyterian Church, the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, the Kohler Creative Communications Building, and the University of Kansas Capitol Federal Hall. Brian holds a Bachelor of Science in Architectural Studies from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and a Master of Architecture with honors from Washington University in St. Louis, where he was awarded both the AIA Scholastic Gold Medal and the school's Distinguished Young Alumni Award. Brian has with him several colleagues who he will introduce, Brian Watson, Nathan Kuhl, and Nick Watkins. But we'll begin with a presentation from Brian. Let's welcome our guest.
All right, well, can you all hear me? Is it working well? Yeah? Okay. Well, thank you. First of all, it's really great to be here. We went through, well, there we go. We came down from Chicago where what it looks like outside right now is like summer. So it was brutal, but nothing was going to stop us from getting here to present. So my name is Brian Vitale. I'm the managing director of the Chicago office of Gensler. I love the position, but I hate the title. I've got, as you said, 350 or so, a handful here, of the most talented people in the city of Chicago, and not one of which wants to ever be managed. So I really hate that title. What I try to do in my position is really provide an environment where people, not too different from what's happening here, to provide an environment where people can collaborate and really do their best work. And then I try on a daily basis to inspire them to some degree so that we can really get people motivated and turn out amazing work, which we'll share with you some of that. Gensler, as you may or may not know, is I like to call it the largest boutique in the world. We are now pushing 6,000 people in the firm. 40, what's our number now? 47, 48, somewhere in their offices around the globe. We're pretty much everywhere, South America, Australia, Asia, Europe, all over. What's amazing about Gensler is, though, that we act as one firm. So we never compete with our other offices. So it allows us to pool the best talent on every project without worrying about any kind of territory or anything like that. So it's an amazing organization. One thing that I was just sharing is that at one point Gensler was known as Gensler Architects, but in the early 2000s, I believe it was, we actually took the word architects off our name and are now just known as Gensler. And it's amazing to see what happened. We always talk about hockey stick growth. Once we did that, we had that sort of moment of hockey stick growth because it eliminated sort of what people assumed we did, right? When you have architects after your name, they just assume you do buildings and that's it. And a lot of what I want to talk about today touches on that, is this notion of the assumption and why that's really bad. So the project, the title that you see here, Paranormal, which normally is reserved for ghosts and ghouls, and maybe would have been better a few months ago during Halloween. Really what we want to talk about here is this idea of I guess the presentation has come together because a lot of people ask, how do you innovate? How do you become a disruptor? How do you create projects that are maybe not the norm? So paranormal meaning not the normal in some ways. The idea here, and second of all, this is a very personal presentation, at least the first half, and then these guys will come up and have an opportunity to talk to you about some of the research we're doing. It's not a sort of official Gensler presentation. This really comes about from my way of thinking, how I design, and how I ask everybody from students to my people in my office to think. And it wasn't necessarily a sort of favored way to do things. As you heard in sort of bios, I love to blur academia and the professional worlds, but it's not a great business model always. And so to get people to believe in it, you have to show results. And so the work is ultimately the results that we'll go through. And so as I mentioned, what I want to do today here, just in maybe the first half of this presentation, is talk to you about how to see the world differently. Because for me, that is the key to being an innovator, into creating projects that will change the world. You're doing a lot of that here in the school. We just took a quick tour. It's about coming to conclusions that other people aren't coming to. Design is a really powerful thing, and if you think about it in the future, we just had Bruce Mao in our office, a wonderful, big thinker, started out with graphic design and now everything else. And he was saying that design is the most powerful profession right now because the world has a lot of problems. And they're either going to be solved by design or by accident. And we sort of want to be on that design side, right? And it's an amazing opportunity for us all. And one of the reasons is that not only are we great strategic thinkers, but we also can communicate our ideas, which he is obviously a genius at. So in any case, I just want to go through this. You're not going to see, I have to warn you, you're not going to see a lot of buildings until the very end, but I think that's good. I want to get us out of that. Here's that first slide. I really do believe this, that you have to free yourself from architecture. Architecture itself, nobody in this room loves designing buildings more than I do, but at the same time, if we're always thinking about doors and windows, if we're always thinking about rooms like this, and not going beyond that, we're going to come to the same conclusions. And I'm just telling you, the world needs different conclusions, and you're all finding that out now. You're seeing some experiments that are happening here. These guys are going to talk about a little bit about that as well. But in my sense is, anytime we can move the conversation away from architecture, we're talking about big ideas, it will come back to that, right? But we need to kind of remove ourselves for a moment. So this guy here, Astro Teller, by the way, that's the title I want, Captain of Moonshots, not Managing Director, Captain of Moonshots. So Astro Teller is with X, part of the Google empire. And he's that person that gets them to do amazing things. He's that entrepreneur that says, let's do driverless cars, let's map the entire globe so that people can look at Street View. He's that person. And he did a TED Talk a few years ago, and he said this: shifting perspective is more powerful than being smart. So we just need to think about that for a moment. You have a lot of smart people in the world, right? But his point is that if you can look at a problem from multiple angles, from different perspectives, from multiple viewpoints, you're going to come to better conclusions, right? And this is that notion of failing often. You always hear the word, right? You have to fail a lot. You have to fail a lot. And nobody really understands what that means. They actually celebrate people who fail. He says the quicker I can kill an idea, the better off we are, right? And they celebrate that. How fast can you kill an idea? Because it just means you're going to come back with a different solution until you find the one that works. So there's a couple quotes here in the beginning. This is John Berger, who's a wonderful art critic, who said the relationship between what we see and what we know is never settled. And this is sort of the key for me. As I said, I think what we have to do is get out of what we know and into a world of the unknown. So just for example, this is how we all see. This is sort of the standard way of seeing. It's a very sort of Descartesian viewpoint. It's you are the center of the universe, which we know we're not, but we think probably often that we are. And everything is sort of in my view, and I understand it immediately. It's that a priori kind of effect, right? I know that's a chair. I see people. There's a door. And you leave it at that. The problem is, as you do that, you start to learn, you get a repertoire of these pieces, right? And as you do that, something happens in the back of your brain. This happens. You get this library. There's a library in the back of your brain. And that library is the thing that is going to keep you from being great designers, problem solvers, and so forth. The library can be helpful for some things, right? If you touch fire one time, you don't want to touch it again. You want to remember that, right? But at the same time, what we don't want to do is have that library affect our vision. We don't want that library to stop us from seeing the world in a different manner and just kind of seeing it as we already know it. There was this really great surrealist game that was played way back when. And they used to put a coin on the table, and they would ask you what shape you saw. And everybody would say a circle. The reality is, when you see it in perspective, it's more of an ellipse, right? And certainly a lot of people won't see that. But the thing is, you know it's a circle. And so your brain is saying, don't worry, eyes. You know it's a circle, just say a circle. We need to get away from that. That is the key to being a good designer and solving problems. So here's a couple of really wonderful philosophers, Deleuze and Guattari, who said a painter never really paints on a virgin canvas because it is already covered with pre-existing, pre-established cliches. And the painter needs to empty the canvas of all these givens, right? So the thing is, even when you come and you're sitting in your studio or wherever you might be sitting in front of your laptop or that piece of trace or that blank piece of paper, what they're saying is if you are not able mentally to wipe everything you know clean before you start that project, you're going to end up with the same conclusions that you had previous. And you are not going to get to innovative solutions. You're not going to help us solve the problems of the world. So this is another example. If we look at that first one again, this is actually a diagram of a painting that Cézanne did. You can see immediately from the eyes the multiple viewpoints that happen in this still life, right? You are looking at it, even though it's a two-dimensional object on a wall, you are looking at it from multiple viewpoints. And you're seeing things that you wouldn't typically have seen if it was even a photograph, right? A photograph would be very sort of plain. You're actually getting a deeper understanding. And this is the way that we need to start seeing. We need to start seeing these things, as Astros Teller said, from multiple perspectives. So when I was in grad school at WashU, as you mentioned, there was this concept that hit me. And some of you probably know, maybe you guys are reading about this in theory class, but it was called the visible and the invisible. And this was done, or at least championed by Maurice Merleau-Ponty. He was a wonderful philosopher. I think he passed in the mid to late 60s, French. And he talked about this concept, and this is where things started to fall into place for me. And I don't expect it for all of you, but it sort of builds a little bit of the framework here for how I then start to understand about thinking differently. And just by definition's sake, he said that the visible is all the things that I said, the chair, all the things that we see. It's sort of the sensible. It's the things you know. It's what's right in front of you. But there's this thing, the invisible, as he referred to it. And to me, this was this watershed moment. It was like this aha moment. It's what you don't actually see, but it's there, right? You have to find it. You have to reveal it. It can have multiple meanings and interpretations. Multiplicity begins and allows you to qualify the whiteness, as he said, but you can put any color in there. And just for an example, if we pick the color red, it seems to be very important to this university, and I'm very happy. I saw a lot of people with red shoes today. I thought that was really cool. If we take that color red, we can, from a scientific standpoint, we can talk about red, and we'll all come to the very same conclusion, right? We can do it by wavelengths, we can do it with pigments, but we'll get there, right? It's almost like an equation. But if I went around this room and asked you what red meant to you, and what red meant to you, and what red meant to you, we can get 50 different answers, right? And that's what excited me, because all of a sudden there was this sort of, this in-between, it was actually really revealing, but at the same time, it wasn't an absolute. So where we're from, we have this amazing sculpture by Picasso. You guys are all probably familiar with it. I don't know how many of you have actually seen it in person. But every day, even on days like today when it's cold, there are people in front of this sculpture taking photographs. And they take this photograph, and nobody knows what it is. And in fact, Mike Royko, who was this amazing writer, columnist, said that it had a long, stupid face and looks like some giant insect that's about to eat a smaller, weaker insect. It has eyes that are pitless, cold, and mean. Not exactly what you want to hear when you spend a lot of money on a Picasso. Actually, Picasso gave him this sculpture, so it was just the cost of building. He didn't charge the city anything. They wanted to replace this sculpture. They wanted to replace it with a baseball player or something else because they really thought it was awful. But what's really interesting, in fact, some people said it was a baboon and almost thought it was kind of a joke, like that he played on us all in Chicago. But what's amazing, if we go back to Astro and what he said about shifting your perspective, if you go and change the way that you look at this sculpture. So Picasso knew everybody was going to look at this sculpture this way. And he was sort of playing with us. If you go around the back side, can you all see the face? So you see there's like the nose and the lips and the chin and the shoulder and the hair, sort of like how that woman is on the left-hand side there. So all of a sudden it becomes this really beautiful thing. Now, every day, thousands of people look at this sculpture and never see this, but it's there, right? So to me, it's just like design. You're looking at that blank piece of paper, and everybody's going to come to this conclusion, but what you need to do is find the one that nobody is seeing. But it's there, I promise you. You can even see Moreau's Queen City sculpture in the background there. It's almost like they get to talk to each other. Like two great artists kind of had this moment where they were joking with all of us in the city, said nobody would know. So let's change to poetry. So Wallace Stevens, one of the greatest American poets, he said that a poet looks at the world the way a man looks at a woman. And you can replace that with whatever you'd like, but understand that what he's saying, when I met my wife, the first thing I wasn't thinking is, oh, look at golden section, elbow and chin, and everything looks like it aligns, and that's great, right? There's a deeper reaction that happens. And that's the way he was saying you have to look at the world. You have to sort of allow yourself to have that. So there can't be a more appropriate slide than this one right now than what we drove through today. So this is a poem that he wrote, and it describes today, especially in Chicago, where we had 50-mile-an-hour winds and 12 inches of snow, and it was cold. And to all of us, we cringe, right? It's like, this is awful. Until you read the title of this poem, which is The Snowman. What do you think the snowman thought of today in Chicago? Best day of his life, right? This is fantastic. So obviously, somebody can see the beauty in this. And if you want to be a great designer, you have to see the beauty in this. You have to eliminate those biases. You have to eliminate that library in the back of your head that's telling you this is an awful day. Because I promise you there's beauty in it. And if you find it, you'll learn from it. One of the reviewers of this poem, and there are obviously a lot of them, said, I think above even that orange, he knows that in the winter the days aren't cold and miserable. You are, right? To see like him, you must constantly challenge your own assumptions. So if you can have essentially empathy, right? You have to look through the eyes, different perspective, through the eyes of the snowman to see the beauty in that day, then that's what you have to do. So one last example before we talk about some research opportunities. This is an artist. He happens to be a German artist, and you'll understand why being German is important to this, because he is the most rigorous person you will ever meet. He paints this glass, and he paints it twice a day, every day, for I don't remember the duration. It's been like 30, 40 years. And you can see it just goes on and on and on and on and on. And he's filled galleries of this one painting. And so why is he doing this? Why am I showing it to you? And here's what he said. Every single time I paint the glass, I try to perceive it without any preconception and paint what I see objectively at that moment. So you talk about just like torturing yourself, but to look at the same glass in the same position at the same time of day and try to find something different in every day, that's what we all have to do, right? Now that's borderline crazy, but it's a great lesson learned because every time he paints it different, in a different manner. So we want to talk a little bit about data at Gensler, and I'm going to bring, I think, Nick can come up and talk to you a little bit about this, but I want to set it up because as we're talking about this and using art, there's this artist in Chicago, his name is Jason Salvan, and he said this, that data will provide us with a new perspective of the familiar, right? Basically, you have a lot of assumptions. We were just talking about this. You have a lot of assumptions in life. And our hope is that the data that we collect on projects, and that's where we're headed as a firm, is going to change those assumptions. Where we thought everybody was going to go here and use this piece of furniture because it's the right place to go and eat, maybe that's not the case. But now we can actually see that. What you're looking at here is actually the movie Titanic. completely digitized and pixelated. But what's amazing about it is you can start to see it, right? Like the beginning, there's the Titanic taking off. You see some blue water. In the middle's the love, the brown. You're down in the ship. The love story happens, and then you know what happens down at the bottom where there's more blue, right? But it's pretty amazing to see this because it gives you that movie is like 3 hours long, right? But you can see it in a snap how the movie lays out. Just one more example from Jason, he's an amazing guy. These are houses for sale in different parts of the country. And what he's done is he's overlapped them, and he digitizes it and basically averages them. And all I can tell you is I know which one is Chicago. The reality is the one on the left there at the bottom is Chicago. Red brick, gray sky, right? It's not the one in the blue. That's like Los Angeles probably. That's San Diego, somewhere else, maybe Denver. But what he was saying is you can actually, by just taking photos of houses for sale and overlapping them and looking at the digital and the data, you come to these really amazing conclusions. So with that, do you want to come up? So I want to introduce Nick Watkins. I think we... Okay.
Well, thank you, Brian. Well, thank you, and for the wonderful segue. I think at Gensler, research is fairly central to everything and giving another lens and point of view on a problem at hand. A lot of my job is to defy assumptions with the evidence. A lot of my other aspect of the job is to create appropriate visualizations that are persuasive, that show people that evidence. Now, the first part of the job, it's fairly easy to do. We're taught that, we're trained that a lot as researchers, as PhDs, or what have you. I have a PhD in environmental psych, for example. The other part in terms of visualization and how you take these materials and pull them into design delivery is a whole other question and a whole new world we're embarking on in computational design, with BIM, with GIS systems, and so on and so forth. The level that visualization is taking us is to a whole other point of view on problems, on discovering problems and discovering the right solutions for them. So this approach here is something we embody every day in what we do across the offices. I correspond with the Chicago office quite frequently, much to their, I don't know, delight, I hope. But generally, we do have a great time. And that kind of cross-pollination has led to this great synergy between design, tech, and practice that then translates into metaphors that translate into context within spaces themselves. And this whole notion that space isn't just a passive recipient and stage for what we are, but it's also an intelligence. You're familiar with the concept of affordances, for example. This is like affordances gone to the extreme. This is like a digital environment or a space, any airport, hospital, what have you, where it's so responsive to your needs and personal habits that it's going to be a seamless experience, it's going to be a tailored experience, and what matters is the experience. In a lot of the world, we look at the bottom line in terms of value as the money involved or the safety or security or the risk avoided. What's shifting now is towards, did you feel good there? Well, you know what? If you probably felt good there, it probably was good for you, as we find again and again through the research. So we're also switching more towards mixed methods, where we're pulling in surveys, we're pulling in the visualization of spaces through things like space syntax. How many of you are familiar with that concept? Well, like space syntax, like right in front of me, I see all of you right now, and you have loads of information, all the way from the kind of how receptive you are to the presentation to where you're sitting and so on and so forth. Outside of this point of view, behind me and a little bit of Brian and back, that might as well be out of sight, out of mind. We can measure that now and see how that affects spatial cognition in terms of wayfinding in space, in terms of right-sizing space, in terms of what products to put in space, in terms of how to standardize space. So where is this all leading in my world, in my day-to-day job with these gentlemen? It's, I'm involved heavily with the layering a lot of different data streams. So we are heavily into the business of integration, if you will, of these data streams, so we can see things that others don't. So up at the top there, you see a space syntax diagram where these are hot spaces if they're red. I can just tell you based on this plan, it'll stay anonymous, it's our offices. but it's a good example. It's our New York City office. Some of those red spaces aren't where the designers hypothesized they should be or designed them for. And the functions don't coincide with some of those red spaces. We know it now. We measured it. Unfortunately, with the hindsight of a POE. But then we added layers of what are our actual travel patterns across those spaces. And we aggregated those through sensors and through observations, and then you see the sensors, excuse me, and then we mapped it into the actual BIM model of our space so that we could go in, rotate it in any capacity, take any viewpoint, and see, and even in VR, swap out environmental features and see how we react to them. Chicago went through a very similar exercise where they actually, they anonymized the data, but they actually were able to localize the data to specific individuals where we did not. So a lot of our offices engaged in this activity a little while ago, and then we compared results. But
can I tell a funny story before you go to this
of course.
next slide? So about NOIGAT. So with the heat mapping, and this is amazing, the tools that you see here that Nick's talking about. We were doing some work with the Art Institute of Chicago. They had just finished the Renzo Piano edition, this beautiful edition at the University, at the Art Institute of Chicago. And they had this heat mapping exercise, and they were concerned because there was one docent, they have all these information booths, there was one docent that had the brightest red spot, and they were so confused by this. And they said, we've done all this work, and we've got all these amazing pieces of art, and why? So they went to this woman who happened to be there and said, we've got all this data, and it's showing us that you are the most frequented docent, and even more so than much of the art. Why is everybody coming to you? And she simply looked at them and said, they're all asking where the bathrooms are. And so they put a sign up, and that took care of that, right? But that's what data starts to reveal, is this sort of mystery of why everybody was going to this person. And quite frankly, they just needed better wayfinding.
yeah, it's so interesting to find things like that. And then just give you an example from healthcare. More often than not, there's been a few projects I've been involved with where people we don't want people to use that exam room, or we don't try to assign doctors to that OR. And these spaces have many pejorative terms associated with death or with a bad outcome. And in large part, when we've actually researched these are spaces which are largely more inaccessible. And when you have so many things on your mind and on your working memory, they're not at top of mind because they're not in direct visibility for you. And we find this also in research of EDs. So if you are ever, unfortunately, and I highly encourage you never to go to hospital unless you can help it, but if you're unfortunately in a hospital, be near the nurse station. Be near places where people can react to you, and you're not out of sight and out of mind, and you're also in earshot. And it's a very similar point of view, and accounts for a lot of patient outcomes, including mortality, they've been finding. So as much as it's anecdotal and funny at times, it's also pretty darn serious. Mm-hmm. Now, we combine all these layers for these multiple perspectives. And here's an example from an actual project. This was actually of a clinic setting. The client was particularly interested in your upper left and seeing if that module worked well, because they were very modular. And there's also another generative aspect of the design associated with this project that we won't go into here in too much depth. But they were concerned that, in particular, that the care providers necessarily weren't reaching the patients as much and weren't having as many collaborative opportunities back of house, even though they had their own offstage area. So we mapped it. We marked their travel distances. We distributed surveys. We integrated all the data. And then we simulated based on that. And what did we find was the optimal solution? Actually, what we found here towards the bottom was the optimal, which defied a lot of their module, basically. Of course, it was more expensive up front, but in the long term contributed to a lot of savings, so they recouped the costs within less than a year. And also, patients and providers were likely to have higher providers are actually higher retention. Also, patients were more likely then to, through the simulations, have higher satisfaction levels because they're no longer out of sight, out of mind. So it's redder down here, and then the care providers are more accessible to their patients. It's a standardized floor and so on. And these are things that people aren't going to be able to articulate unless you measure them. these are things that designers sometimes can't articulate unless you show them. We had one client, she saw one of these diagrams, she was the CNO of a hospital, and communicated to her right away, and the entire floor plate changed with that decision.
And I think it can't be the information that we have been getting now. We've invested a lot in research. And first of all, when I told you about that idea of taking architects off of the word Gensler, like now all of a sudden we have people like this, right? And we may never have had an opportunity to work together because now we're hiring researchers, we're hiring economists, we're hiring strategists and so forth to expand the way we get information and also to get us to solutions that more often than not are counterintuitive, but that's what the data shows.
It's very interesting because you're aware of this system. We have an extensive internal system of research grants, of which we have 35 out right now, where the designers and others sitting here and elsewhere are actual participants on the research team. So we are working in a very translational fashion, applied fashion, directly on these research kind of projects. So it's an investment as much in our integration as anything as well.
Yep, and as a designer, what it does for me when I'm working on a project is it arms me with more information, right? And that's all we can ask for is that first line that we draw. We were talking about that sketch that's up there. Those lines are loaded with information because they're coming from our extensive research, both the traditional manner and then also what you're seeing here now in a much more technological manner. So, okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about work. So you're going to see some projects, and all of these projects, I think, are doing a couple of things. One, they're incorporating research in one way or another. Two, they actually are doing a very similar thing, all of these, into what you are doing out here, where we are looking to combine people that don't want to necessarily be combined. So I don't know how else to say that, right? So you've got a number of different departments here. The idea is we want to get you all together, right? And so that we create spaces to do that. These projects all do that. So the first one is the Gratz Center at Fourth Presbyterian Church in Chicago. Many of you, if you've ever visited Chicago, this is that beautiful old church that's right on Michigan Avenue across the street from the Hancock Tower. The ironic story about this church is when they built this in 1914, it was the cheapest piece of property they can find in the city. Now it is probably the single most valuable piece of property in the city. That part of Chicago grew up around this church. This is the original building. Was built for less than $400,000 back then, the entire, and it is one of the most magnificent spaces in Chicago. They asked us this question as part of the competition: is how do you integrate a contemporary building into a historic Gothic campus? They knew they wanted something modern. They just didn't know how to, one, integrate it, two, sell it to their 6,000 members, and they needed to sell it to those 6,000 members. So when we went in, as I told you, get out of the world of architecture, because if we would have just shown up with a beautiful modern building, maybe, maybe not. Maybe they say I don't like it. Maybe they say, what we actually did in the competition is we showed up with the color wheel, which is a little scary for a lot of people in my office, but I was like, we're going to do this. And we talked about the color wheel, and you guys all learned about the color wheel in elementary school, and you know that you've got the primary and secondary and tertiary colors, but you also know about this, right? Is when you have colors on the opposite ends of the color wheel, they are opposites, just like they were in their heads thinking, but what do we call them? Complementary colors, right? And why? They complement each other. They make each other stronger. So this was our way to get them out of worrying about a building and have them think about a concept that we can actually put two things side by side that are very different, and they can actually make each other stronger. And they weren't thinking that way. They were worried that if we put something modern next to this very traditional looking building, that it would actually detract. We talked about Van Gogh. It was a very educated and cultured group of people. They loved this. Like, wait, we're not talking about buildings? This is wonderful. Because they were so stressed out about it. And so we talked about his use of complementary colors. We also talked about Shakespeare and the use of foils in literature and how you put two characters next to each other but very opposite. And what did they do? They brought out the good qualities in each other. And so we just came to this. This was our competitions. Like, we're going to complement rather than mimic. And what we did is we sent people out to take photographs of, once we won, we asked people to go out and take photographs of the building, and this is what they came back with, were all these amazing details, these Gothic details in limestone. This is actually from New Bedford, Indiana, all this limestone, so in this state. But it took this photo from the Hancock Tower, which, what did it do? It shifted our perspective physically. Somebody took this photograph. We happened to find it online, and I guess I'm not giving credit to them, but somebody took this photo. And what we saw, and you're not seeing it really great here, but you're starting to see the patina, the color, the copper that was turning green. We didn't see any of that when we look at the building because the limestone is so amazing. So we went back and we photographed all the stuff we missed, just like that sculpture, the Picasso sculpture, right? We were looking at it, but we just didn't see it. And so we went back and we took pictures of everything that had a patina on it. So the handles, the lanterns, the downspouts are like works of art. And what we realized is these are all the elements that were doing the hard work, the heavy, like the limestone was this beautiful thing that everybody was looking at, but all the hard-working materials, they're all copper. So this is the plan. You can see on the left-hand side of that plan, on the right of that plan is the original church, and our building is the one that is on the angle. It actually picks up, there's an angled street down on the next block, so all the buildings, so we sort of mitigate that. First floor on the left, second floor, it's actually, there are 3 additional floors here, mostly classrooms. There's a chapel, you see that circle there, that's a chapel. There are classrooms here, there's a dining hall, there's a daycare facility. But in between these buildings, the new and the old, you'll see photographs of this, really is where the magic happened, because you have elderly people who are there taking classes, you have kids that are preschool aged, you have people practicing the organ. It is just like a melting pot of things and sounds and everything else, and it's a magical space. So this is the building, that's the copper. We decided to clad the building in the copper that was there, so it became this accessory. You know, we said this is going to be a hard-working building, so let's make it out of the material that all those hard-working elements were made out of. 1,440 hand-cut and bent pieces of copper done by 2 gentlemen out of North Carolina who actually brought their RV here and did the work at the metal workers shop. And it was as old school as possible. They would do it, and they'd show it to us, and we'd say, not yet. And they'd go back behind the curtain, and they'd do something else, and they kept coming out until we found the one we liked. You can see it has a cantilever. This is, you see the old church there in the background there, our church, or the new building, the Gratz Center. Above, what's hanging above there is actually the chapel, and you'll see images of that. This is that in-between space. So on the left, the original building. On the right, the new building. We've got that grand stair that takes you up to the chapel on the 2nd level. You can see, we were talking about this earlier today too, there was this opportunity to have a double height space, but we thought it was just as important to have single height spaces as well, so that you had an idea of what was more circulation, public space, versus where you can come off and have a conversation. If you think about it, this is a church, so there were some private conversations that had to happen, more intimate conversations, and we wanted to make sure that we had spaces for all of that. The clerestory that happens above there, which you'll see in a moment, was actually drawn, a line that was drawn at City Hall by the fire commissioner, who said, you can't, on that 2nd level, be any closer than this to the church because of fire reasons. And we were all panicked for about 3 minutes. And then we said, great, we'll turn it into this beautiful clerestory. It's everybody's favorite piece. You can see it here. You can see the old building. One of my favorite comments about this building was by a parishioner who has been the longest standing parishioner of that congregation, who said being in our building and looking back at the original church was like he was looking at it for the first time. This is a member who had been there for 50 years, but he was seeing perspectives he had never seen before. Again, think about going back. When you change your perspective, you get a new clarity. This is that chapel with the labyrinth in the floor that's inlaid there. It's really beautiful. They open it up like this at lunchtime so that people can come in and walk the labyrinth and sort of a clear your head moment. We've had to go there and use it a few times. But you can see the copper on the inside as well, although the copper on the inside was done, we refer to it as a dirty penny because it wasn't outside. Outside, obviously, things oxidize differently, and patina on the inside, we kept it in this tone. They also installed this piece of art, which is amazing. The piece of art was installed, we knew it was coming, we just weren't sure what it was going to look like, and we all collectively held our breaths when we were waiting for the installation because we hadn't seen anything. And when they put it in, it couldn't have been more perfect. It's actually all dichroic glass. It reflects all the colors around it. In any angle that you look at it, it's different, and it's amazing. You see the reflections. It's almost like a modern-day piece of leaded or stained glass in a traditional church. There you can see on the old church the flashing done in the copper. What we sort of took that inspiration from. You can see the Hancock Tower there right next to it. It's a very interesting sort of connection of spaces between the tall tower and this very small, intimate building. The Shirley Ryan Ability Lab. This is a project where, in speaking with the director, Dr. Joanne Smith, she said, what I want to do is bring people together that shouldn't, or people that don't want to be together. And we did a lot of research on this to find out what their patterns were. But there were three people: the patient, the clinicians, or the doctors, and the researchers. And what we learned is the researchers and the clinicians, the doctors, didn't necessarily get along culturally. The doctors were get there at 6, they were done by 4, suit and tie. The researchers were more like all of you and us in studio, right? It was like show up at 10, maybe stay till 11, jeans, hoodies. You were crunching numbers. Her dream, though, was to get all of them together in service to the patient to be there as well. Because she said that if a patient, if a researcher can see a patient struggling to drink a glass of water, they would learn something and maybe come to a different conclusion than just looking at the data. This is a piece by Chagall, who the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab had commissioned to do a piece in 1984. And that piece was actually Chagall's last work of art before he passed away. And so they have this. It's about 17 feet tall by 11 feet. It's actually not too dissimilar. It's a little wider than that proportion. But what's interesting when we did research on this piece is Chagall, when he got this commission, said, now I'm a doctor. Because he thought his piece could help heal people. And I love the sort of like gusto of that and audacity that a piece of art can help heal people. But we took a little bit of that into what we designed. And so this is the tower. It's about 30 stories tall. And it is very simple all the way around, except for this one moment that you see there on the north side of the building. Dr. Smith told us that if you were to come to the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, something very bad probably has happened to you. Stroke, you may have lost a limb, just really awful things. You go there to be rehabbed, brain injury. And she referred to it as a disruption in people's lives, and it was really awful. And so we said, well, what if we can make disruption beautiful? And so here you see this building, and the disruption in the facade is actually the thing everybody takes photographs of. And when they come in, they talk about it. And that's actually where you get rehabbed, that's where you eat. All the great things in this building happen in that space. And the doctors actually talk to them about it. They actually talk to them. So I do feel like we actually have had an opportunity to help heal people because it gives them a way to look at a disruption in a more positive way rather than only in a negative way. The building has this great, I call it a tattoo. It's got these amazing, we did this project in collaboration with HDR and Clive Wilkinson out of Los Angeles. And Clive came in and did these amazing, with Egg Studios, these amazing graphics on the building in addition to some other things. And when you look up at it, and there's this great history of architecture that when you look up, things look back at you. They have all these amazing graphics, and you can see here. But wherever that happens, that's typically where that facade, that disruption happens. So it's kind of this moment of jubilation that's always happening in this zone of the building. It has come to, and this is actually the interior of the building, again, an amazing art piece that reflects you as you walk by it. Walls are all curved for people in wheelchairs to have a little bit more fluidity. It's an amazing project that has been published and received so many awards. It's really been kind of humbling to see. But the project really, again, was all around that idea of how can we help be part of that process of healing. The next project that I want to show is the Plumbers Local 130. This is a project that we just completed. It is a place where plumbers in the union go to be trained. And so we took that as an opportunity to showcase their craft. And so you see the sign here is made out of crimped copper pipe. So we tried to showcase the copper as best we could everywhere and show the sort of inside of the building outward. This is the building. It is made out of a different kind of copper panel. It is on the west side in the Fulton Market area, West Loop of Chicago. And you can see it's very different than what you probably see as training facilities for most trades. It is very dynamic. It is very modern. It really talks about sort of this union. There's amazing outdoor spaces there. It is on a piece of property that is worth also a lot of money. But these are the kind of moments that I love about it. These are the bathrooms. And so not only do we just say, well, let's just put the copper on the outside, but like let's make it a piece of art. And so you see the copper pipes coming down there. You see the thermostatic pieces. And so not only are they learning about it, but it's being elevated into something very different. Working with the lighting designer to put the lights behind the mirrors so that it has this glow. It's really sort of an amazing piece. And this kind of stuff happens throughout the building. This is the roof deck, which has some of the most spectacular views of the city. But it's also a learning lab. So it's like a place where people go to enjoy, but while they're up there, they learn about how you deal with green roofs, how you can do thermal heating of water. There are pieces on the roof that heat the water. And this building is one of the, I forgot the exact number, but uses so little water on a daily basis because it's harvesting and all the reductions that it's doing inside, that it's really pretty amazing. So just a couple more. This is the Columbia College building. This one's under construction. But again, just talking about the data and talking about how to look at things in a different manner. That diagram up there on the left is probably the most important thing that I can talk to you about. They wanted to have a place where all the different schools of the college could come together. So fashion design, media, fine arts, you name it. They do all of this. But they're all in individual buildings. And so how do we get them all to come together? So this building was meant to do that. And we said the best way to have everybody see what's happening is in an atrium, right? You've all been in buildings with atriums. You have an atrium here where you can see activity on different levels. But the problem is this building wasn't on a campus. It was in the middle of the city. And so we just offered one idea, that rather than having the atrium in the middle of the building, that we actually turn the atrium inside out and put the atrium on the outside of the building, which again is a little bit counterintuitive because atriums are supposed to be on the insides of buildings. But you can see that diagram, and every time Dr. Kim, the president of the college, talks about the building, he always makes this. He always does that, and I feel like that was great because he talks to people about donating. He's like, we're going to have this building, and we're turning it inside out, and it's going to be amazing. And so I love that he owns the story now of how you can take an atrium that is typically interior and put it on the exterior of the building. This is the building. I'll show you a construction photo. We're about 6 months away. But all glass, but different types of glass. So there's different etchings and films and so forth. And areas are revealed, not to reveal actual art, but the making of art. And so there's this process that happens. We wanted people to be informed as to what's going on. We didn't really worry about the end piece, like let that go to a museum or to a gallery. What we wanted to do was show the people dancing, working on a routine, people practicing music, painters painting. And so those kind of things happen on the exterior of this building. You can see the corner shot here of what that looks like. So that's the downtown is right down the street here. And then this was the diagram that we showed. It's a really sort of simple diagram, not even rendered in a high manner, but it just showed all the activity and the stairs and the circulation that would happen in the atrium that was actually the facade of the building. And so this is a construction shot from, I guess, about a week or two ago. So it'll be ready for the school year next year, and we're really excited about this. The University of Kansas Business School, one really simple diagram, and again, it was about changing the way they viewed things. So the image on the left is how every building at the University of Kansas works, and I'll bet a lot of the buildings here where you have student space on the first couple of floors, faculty space up above, and like this line between the two where you don't want a lot of mixing. And they said that's the way that the building needs to work. And we said, well, maybe. What if we just did that? What if we just took them from being on top and we put them on the side, and we still had a space in between that allowed for, a little bit of separation. But what we had in our mind is that space was going to become the most important part of the school, right? Because that was the place where everybody was going to mix. And so you ended up with a bar of learning and a bar of working and plan. And so you can see the building here. That happens to be the student side. And wonderful on the ground floor place a colloquium where they can have exchanges of ideas that are very public onto the space. This happens to be the student side as well, so very open, lots of glass. These classrooms here, active learning classrooms on the outside, that colloquium on the ground floor, auditorium space. And then this was more of the faculty side. So yeah, as you can see, individual offices. It was a business school, so everybody got their own office. And the theater or auditorium that is coming out here, we played. It had to be limestone or precast as part of the rules of the school, and so we played with it as much as we could. So you got some shadows and some really interesting lines. They allowed us in some way to get away with this Corten steel, which we were shocked by, but now it's turned into something they really love to watch as it changes. You can see the plans here. So the north part of it is the student area. South part, we see all these offices, faculty, but that in-between zone, which you'll see in a moment here, really the most important part where they both come together. And here's that space. So you can see there's sort of a grandstand of stairs where students can sit and watch everybody else walk by. The space that you see on the second floor there, that is the TA help area, which in the original program, if we followed it, was meant to be back of house space. That's where kids would go and be quiet. And we said, well, what if we put it on display? And they said it'll never work. People will be embarrassed to go there. They now want more of that space because it is so used. And what they're finding is students are not afraid to ask for help, but this takes it into a place where you don't feel like you have to go into a back room, but it's just part of the social kind of environment. And so people eat there, they get help there, it becomes much more casual. So it's done exactly the opposite of what they said, or what they feared it would do. The stair that you see here picks up that Corten steel, and it's a very social stair, big landings, everybody takes it. And then they had an artist come in and actually was inspired by some of those colors and decided to do these vintage boxing gloves hanging from the ceiling. And it's above areas where you're supposed to really hammer out ideas. And I love it because I always thought when we designed this building that, you know, between the faculty and the students, that it was almost like a boxing match. And you would come in the middle and you'd mix it up, but then you can always go back to your corner, and it's sort of your safe area. So without even talking about it, they sort of read our mind. And that's Allen Fieldhouse there where the Jayhawks play basketball. So it has this really unbelievable location, and sort of is all focused on that, as that is sort of the temple. So the last project that I just want to talk about quickly, Kohler, up in Kohler, Wisconsin. We were talking about Wisconsin earlier. In Kohler, they wanted to do a creative hub, and they wanted to take people who typically were working in different areas and bring them together so that they can get to market faster, so that they can think differently and they can do work in a different manner. They had the budget was very small, which is not unusual. So we had to be very careful about how we put the building together. And so we wanted it to be a very abstract, sort of simple box. And so that's what you see there on the top. The problem was they also do all the photography there, and they build all the sets there that you see in the advertisements in Architecture Magazine or Record or whatnot. And so it needed to have a taller section, and on top of it was a lot of equipment. So our idea of this pristine little box sitting in the countryside all of a sudden had all this garbage on top. And so what we said is that since it had to do that, well, what if we just brought it up a little bit more? You can see in the section, the photo studio, that taller area, and just sort of sheathe that whole area so we hide all the mechanical equipment, we take into account and the taller section, and we arrive at this piece that they refer to as now the beacon. So all it is a mechanical screen, but it has defined this building and the campus because they say that these are the people that are going to lead them into the future. So that's why it's a beacon, right? They want people to look at this. And so we put some holes in it, and we illuminated it, which was actually no easy task because in our minds you cut holes and you light it up, and the lighting designer was like, well, you can't light nothing. Like something has to be there. So it was actually really intricate. But you do get this amazing color field up there of light that they can actually change and do whatever. The studio is over here, the photo studio is on that side, and they all come together in the middle. You can see what it looks like in the daytime. Even in the daytime, you really get that sort of that look. In our mind, they call it a celestial field. We thought about it as water droplets, but we figured if they're happy, they're happy. So we just call it a celestial field now. This is the entry. You see a little bit of that. This is what it looks like. So you still get this sort of box on this beautiful prairie area, and it's got these beautiful trees around it, and very light and bright on the inside. The other thing is they have an art program there. It's called the Kohler Artist in Residency, where they bring an artist into their foundry and they say, make whatever you want out of the tools we have and the material we have. So everything comes out this cast iron color. And so part of what we were doing was saying, again, a mechanical screen that has become the defining element can also be art. And so this thing now is compared to, and they actually have a plaque that talks about it like they talk about all the art on campus, and here's one of the pieces they put near the building. But this is throughout the village of Kohler. They have these pieces everywhere. And so now this piece up there really starts to talk. This is just a couple shots of the interior. It's a very industrial building. There was a barn on site that was taken down. We used a lot of that material to create some of these conference rooms. It's very white. It's very simple. You can see what it's like when you're there, this beautiful area that you have to work. It's like being outside. Deer come right up to the window. They have wild turkeys and everything else. All right, last slide. This is going back to a quote by Merleau-Ponty. I want to just sort of bring it all back together. It said, in order to see the world and grasp it as paradoxical, we must break with our familiar acceptance of it. And what that image that you see there is Picasso's sculpture of the bull's head, but you can see what it's made out of. And the story goes that he was going through or going by a dumpster, and he saw a bicycle that was thrown away. And you and I, just like that Picasso sculpture, probably would look at it as, well, there's just an old bicycle. And what he saw was a bull's head. So he took the seat off, he took the handlebars off, and he welded them together. So he was looking at the world in a different way, right? He wasn't looking at it as a bicycle. He was looking at it as a different kind of opportunity. And this, if not anything, is the way that I really think, as we talk about research, as we talk about data, as a new way to find that information that we're not seeing on an everyday basis. That is the thing that I'd love for you to keep in your mind as you go back to your studios and as you design, is what am I not seeing that I should be seeing? Because I have to tell you, as a business model, it's great. If you can do things that your competition can't, you win a lot of competitions. And so with that, I think we have time for question and answers. If you guys have any questions, I'd introduce Brian Watson and Nathan Kuhl along with Nick to answer any questions, but that's what we have for you. So thank you for coming on this crazy day. We appreciate it. Oh, yeah.
So there are a lot of collaboration zones and interaction areas, informal areas in the current CAP building. What's interesting is, let me go back about 100,000 feet. So you as designers have a point of view, which is actually of a lot of value in the industry today. I, as a researcher, would call it integration, filtration, what have you. But you are very good at narrative and weaving a story around human motion and what have you. So what's happening is that kind of skill set you have that's sometimes pigeonholed into design thinking is becoming more of what we need to mine and value. Now, how do we leverage that in terms of the classrooms of the future and whatnot? It's what you're already doing in studio settings and want to do beyond the studio setting, which is have that collaborative, creative, iterative spaces, iterative maker kind of spaces where you can create product and have immediate feedback and so on, have that infused directly into a learning space. So the collaboration zones as they currently are kind of pushing that envelope. And we're going to be doing pre and post occupancy studies of these using a variety of methods, including observation. We've talked about sensors, surveys, and so forth. And through these investigations over time, actually these collaboration areas in the facility will evolve to be more of a living lab in and of itself, where the distinction between pre and post occupancy in my world, which is exciting, will disappear entirely. And it will be in real time, and we'll be able to see interesting metrics that we can't necessarily vocalize ourselves. Say, for example, how many feet do you know you walked today? I can't answer that question. You probably can't answer that question. But we can take those metrics, reflect it back to you, mirror it back to you for you to respond to and help us reach a design solution with. Or you can do with your own clients someday. So I think that's how I broadly encapsulate it in terms of what it can do for this kind of audience and what you'd be taking part in passively to a large extent. We're already doing it quite extensively with retail clients, with healthcare clients, with, of course, our workplace clients, which is a lot of the work we do, where they're starting to see more and more of their environments less as a static presence in the landscape and more of an evolving creature with evolving living lab with switch outs, constant switch outs that evolve with the trends and the demands of the various users.
Well, the specifics of the project, we got asked to join with a furniture manufacturer last spring to do a series of workshops to look at your studio spaces, as well as the collaborative spaces. And Nick joined us as part of the Research Institute as just a way of bringing faster iteration. I think our role as architects is part exploration, a large part realization, but I think the best architects go back and learn from their work. And Nick and his team really help us bring new tools for learning about what was successful. Were our creative intuitions correct? So a lot of the technical details that Nick helps us manage help us become better designers. So what we're working with is expanding this building and looking at ways that your different departments can work together and learn from each other. I think in our own practice, the traditional practice of architecture is changing very rapidly, and we are asked by our clients to be general creatives and strategists and help them solve their business problems or their institutional problems in many different ways. And the more tools we have in our toolkit, the more industries we understand, the more facile we can be to help them solve their problems. And so I think a school of architecture should represent that and should be very fluid and allow you to learn as many skills as you are able to expand your creative process and to understand what your process is. I think
and I think that exactly what Nathan was mentioning is it's changing our position with projects where typically we'd come in after all this had been done, get a program and design a building, where now we're helping to define the project, right? And that really changes the position of what we can do. And for some people, that's all we do is define the project, hand it off, and then another architect or somebody will do the work. And in some cases, we help define the project, and then, who better than to carry all that information out into the design of the building. So it's changing our position on a project, and I think that's what's so amazing about what these guys are doing. Not only here, but everywhere. This could be big corporate, headquarters. This could be educational facilities. It could be healthcare, as you mentioned. But it's changing the way that we engage with the work.
You guys talk to the role of energy consideration in the design scheme?
Yeah, so I think when we're looking at any type of space, and whether it's a new building or a renovation, really where we start is, energy, and I think you're talking more from a performance perspective, right, in terms of saving energy and consumption. We look at it from that aspect, and certainly a performance aspect, but then also how it makes people feel in the space. So I think they go hand in hand, right? So when you're looking at saving energy in a building, you're looking at performance of the systems, efficiency, but you're also looking at, for instance, an example is the PNC Tower in Pittsburgh, which is a project that we did, finished a couple of years ago. And that building is right on the cusp of net zero. It's the most efficient skyscraper in the country. And the way that it does that is just by kind of recognizing the climate and where it's at. So it's a very site-specific and region-specific building. So the example there is that it actually takes, it's a double-skin facade for the bulk of the building. And it actually has poppers, these windows that pop out and allow air to come in. It's about 40% of the year where it's actually able to breathe and pull in outside air. So as opposed to conditioning air and kind of needlessly going through the HVAC system, it's pulling in outside air. So not only is it saving energy, but it also gives fresh air to the people in the building so that they have a better air quality. It connects them more with the outside. And it also gives them better control of the space. So they, not only are, you're saving energy, but they're actually measuring occupancy comfort. We're able to kind of quantify the fact that it helps the productivity in the space. It helps the occupant comfort. So things like that, I think, there's a lot of different ways of saving energy and making a much more efficient and kind of usable building. But it's also just looking at really simple things of where is the building, what are the kind of inherent ways that we can make it efficient, but then also make it a better space for the people that are going to use it. So I think from our perspective, that's really where we look first, is just what are those kind of easy wins or kind of ways to think differently about how we can approach it versus just coming in with a really high-performance building system and an envelope that's maybe kind of devoid of where it is and what it's really doing.
And our goal is to get the people who really lead our sustainable practice, researchers, interior design, architects, strategists, all at the table at the same time. And so the worst thing you can do is treat this like, you're building a Model T where it's like, okay, I drew the building, now you do the inside. Okay, well, we better make it sustainable, so now it's your turn to put it on. And then it's all sitting at the table at the same time. And it can be maddening at times, right? Because you have a lot of people going from a lot of different perspectives, but the result is always so much better. And it's amazing what you learn. And you're forcing not only, talking about those different perspectives, you have people around the table with different viewpoints. There's a lot of diversity of ideas and so forth. It makes for a much richer project. And so that's the key. Everything that Brian said here is exactly right. But the key is to make that happen simultaneously with everything else that's happening so they're not afterthoughts. And quite frankly, it also means that buildings, when I see buildings and they say, well, that's a green building, it's like, well, of course it is, because I can see all the pieces. Like, I don't want to see the pieces. I just want it to be a green building, right? And that happens when you integrate it. And it works, and especially PNC Tower and all the buildings you saw here are all sustainable buildings. The goal is to integrate the technology so that it's part of the design and not an afterthought.
And yes, we've been involved directly with the teams, and that example I gave of the New York City office, which I can share so liberally, is a good example of where sustainability worked hand in hand with the Research Institute and designers and others, and then we actually had phone calls with Chicago office and so on and so forth, cross-pollination. And at that point in time, it was largely about establishing the validity of the tools, the sensors we were using within the space, and we were finding that the sensors weren't all that great, in part because how they reported out data and so forth. But we found a resolution for that. It also inspired another solution, which was what we would qualify as more like a spatial intelligence solution, is how to have sustainability be relevant to the people in the space and for them to be engaged with it, and then also to personalize appropriately. So we've been experimenting a lot with, it's coming out in a publication soon, so I can share this, but some augmented reality capabilities within personal workspaces so people can react to various levels of CO2, daylight, and so forth, and personalize them. And it's less intrusive in their day, and they don't have to go and necessarily bother a community manager or what have you about it.
We come to the end of our time. We want to thank our guests for being with us and for the
Mm-hmm.